our forum that we're having for the Landscapes for Our Future work on stakeholder engagement, both for training, for cross-learning, and for exchange. And so I'm going to immediately stop sharing the screen and invite you to put both your videos on as well as your microphones on, because what we want to do is just have an open introduction section. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and can we just see your smiling faces at whatever hour it is? And oh, wonderful. Oh my goodness, it's such a treat. I know so many of us have gotten in the habit of not sharing our videos. And so if you take your mics off, it'd be fantastic. And make sure that your mics are on and just say hello to your colleagues. We've got colleagues across the world joining. And so it's a great time to do a shout out. Feel free to make some noise. If you recognize someone, I see, say hello to them across the room. And then what I'd like to ask you to do is in the chat box, if you could give us your name and where you're based, and then also just how are you feeling this morning as we start this session? Are you like, had you raced in here? Are you not quite awake? Just tell us your name and where you're based, and then how you're feeling as we start this event. Okay, let's look at that chat box. How are we doing? All right, Sabrina. All right, I see several people that I know. Am I seeing the rest or have I got, so everyone? Have you had a chance to say your name, where you're based, how you feeling? Frida, I see you. Want to make sure I see a lot of colleagues on this screen. Thank you, Raphael. Thank you, Jenica. Hello, Jose. Fantastic. Well done. All right, I should put my name in here. I'm Constance Neely, based in the mountains of North Carolina. Feeling great. Okay. All right. Fantastic. Welcome. So we've got so many parts of the world represented: Europe, Africa. I'm seeing, West Africa, Western Central, Kenya, Cambodia. Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. And I didn't hear a lot of shout outs across the room, but I'm hoping that people are going to be available to talk while we're in this session today. And I'm glad to see that people are feeling great and good. So with that, I would like to, before we start in on the content side of things in the process, may I invite Khalil to make some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Constance. Can you guys hear me well? Because I am in a public space. So I just want to confirm that the audio is doing well. Yeah. Terrific. Thank you so much, Constance. And I will give a few shout outs. It's wonderful to see a lot of familiar colleagues on the call. I see Elijah from Kenya has joined, Samang from WCS Cambodia, my colleague from Shivan from Mauritius has also joined. And I see our colleagues from Southeast Asia, but also from Latin America are just starting to trickle into the room, which is terrific. We recognize that the timing is never perfect, but it is early in the morning on that side, but wonderful to have you all join. As you all know, my name is Khalil Waji. I'm the Deputy Coordinator of the CC, the Central Components, along with Kim Gaheb, and our whole team is here. We're really excited about the session today. I want to also give a very big shout out to Constance and Sabrina, who have been running the shared hub at C4Craft for more than 10 years. And so we thought no better way to share this wonderful experience about what are the tools we can use to engage stakeholders and bringing you right to the source, right to Constance and Sabrina. So they've been working tremendously hard over the last few months and really exploring our ILM pillars and many of the ILM landscapes in practice papers that we've been putting together and trying to really map out a process. How does stakeholder engagement fit in to that entire sort of list, that entire process of doing an ILM landscapes approach? And one thing that's really stuck with me is Kim always says, obviously our LFF facilitator, is people think we do engagement because we're nice people. You know, it's one of these things that can often become a checkbox exercise. You know, we let them know what we were going to be doing, and I think we need to move beyond that. And so I think what shared really enables us to do is move beyond this idea of just being nice people, but actually engagement with stakeholders is an investment. And we recognize that for long-term systemic change, that engagement is maybe right at the middle, and we really see it right at the central as the central piece for a landscapes approach and for ILM, making sure that we're getting everyone's varying and different opinions on board, and we're actually co-designing a future pathway, an impact pathway that we can all agree on. So I think that's what's most exciting. Shared is one approach. It's an approach that we use at C4 often. And I know that Sabrina and Constance will give you a bit of a background on the various really successful ways that they've used shared with policy processes all the way down to the local level and working with communities. And these are some of the challenges that we've all heard from you all, whether it's through our missions that we did in 2022, or it's part of the many discussions that we had together at the LFF Summit, right? We see engagement, but also creating a space for discussion and a space for engagement really is as a central piece of how we execute a landscape approach. So we're very excited about that. I want to mention one thing, which is about the language. I see many of our colleagues here also from the West Africa region, the Francophone region. So I'll ask everyone who's speaking in English, please, this is also a reminder to myself, let's speak slowly so the other colleagues can keep up. But we also have Raphael and Divine from our central component team who are here. So feel free to put your comments in the chat box in French, and Divine and Raphael can also support us in making sure that your comments are acknowledged. And yeah, when I look at the participants, I also just want to frame the session today. It's a place for discussion. It's a place for dialogue. It's a place for you to share your experiences. We've had bilateral conversations with you all about ways in which your engagement processes have worked, but also where there's been many challenges. And that, you know, we've had conversations with our colleagues in Vietnam. Constance and Sabrina had a bilateral conversation with us and the team in Mauritius. And really, this is where the gold dust lies. Those experiences are really what's going to make this facilitated exchange really valuable. We want to learn from one another. So just to say, most of the participants in this group are part of the LFF community, are part of the LFF program. So please feel free to speak openly and honestly about the challenges you're facing. And I think that'll add a lot of value to the session today. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are. And I will pass it back over to Constance to really get us started on the content piece.
Are we okay on the screen?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, fantastic. Well, first of all, and really nice opening remarks. And I so appreciate your setting the stage that this has to be an exchange. So moving us forward, we're delighted that everyone is here. And so our session today is going to just flow through a few things, but please bear in mind that if there's something that you want to dig into and have a conversation around, we are available to shape shift this approach. So we're going to talk a bit about some of the survey reflections. We'll be doing that throughout. An overview of the stakeholder engagement approach as we've developed it for shared. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of stakeholder engagement. And we also intend to take the challenges that you so kindly shared through the survey responses, thank you, and talk about, well, how do we actually address some of those as those facilitators and engagement specialists? And then we're most delighted that we're going to hear from three LFF country teams who are going to share their experiences. And then we're allotting a good bit of time for further exchange, reflection. What kind of tools would add value? So we always start as facilitators with principles of engagement. And so in this context, we're in a virtual context. And so we'd invite you to please mute when you're not speaking. When you are speaking, please be concise. And please ask questions in the comment box. You're always welcome and add comments. You're always welcome to register throughout. Raise your hand or drop something in the chat box. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear your scenarios, processes, challenges, and successes. And this is a working event. So I hope you have your coffee, your water, your tea with you. Um, and we actually want to make it as much fun as possible. And then we often have stretch breaks. We allow people to certainly get up and move if you feel like you've been sitting too long. And please bear in mind that this, not only will this presentation and recording be shared, we will be developing a toolkit that will include this information plus a lot more that we hope will be of value. So today our main objectives are to both unpack the importance of the stakeholder engagement approach inside of our integrated landscape management work, to introduce the elements of this shared engagement framework that we've developed that's part of a structured engagement activities. We want to discuss again the facilitation for engagement processes. How do we troubleshoot? Because we're dealing with people and relationships. We want to create more in terms of cross-learning. This is a great opportunity. And then, of course, we want to look at opportunities for different tools and methods that might support the process. So we heard from you that what you would like to get out of this, to learn from this, is really, let's talk about those principles and mechanisms of stakeholder engagement and dealing with multi-actor platforms. And how do you make them sustainable? We want to hold the government accountable. We may not talk as much about that, but we're definitely going to get into landscape governance, which is the next one. We would like it to be practical training that we can apply in real situations and understand different tips. Obviously, to connect across this landscapes for our future work and design future engagements, get some feedback on that. So anything that you want to register, that you want a reaction to, and how do we better integrate local communities with our experts? So we talk about this different dynamic among the backgrounds of our stakeholders. And then what are some insights from different successful methodologies from all of us is where that is. So I just wanted to check before we move on to the content session, are there any other reflections that you want to register? If you didn't have a chance to fill a survey, is there a learning objective you want out of this? Is there something else that you'd like to see as a result of our 2 hours together? And I'll just pause for a second and check for responses. All right. So for the most part, are you hearing that, okay, we can cover, we're covering some of the main points, or is this something that you just see that's dramatically missing? Anything in the chat box? Ah, Valentina, I see you there. Hi. Okay. Well, continue to add ideas. If you want to raise your hand at any point. So Sabrina, did I stop sharing and turn it over to you? Sabrina Troutman is a co-founder of the Shared Decision Hub, and so we're going to be tag teaming today. Sabrina, please.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm a bit like Wanda. I've lost a bit of my voice, but I hope it's clear. And like Khalil said, for our dear Francophone colleagues, if there's anything, just raise your hand, stop, put something in the chat box if the terminology is not clear, and we want to make sure that everybody can understand and go at the same pace. So please see this as an interactive part. So we're going to cover a little bit more on this sort of this session, as Constance said, is kind of 2 sections. So a little bit more on some of the content, and then we have a really big focus on the cross-learning between yourselves from the country teams. So I will start off just as Constance said, we'll bounce between us. You'll be hearing us so you don't get too tired of one or the other, but please also raise your hand at any time. Shout out, stop. This is an informal cross-learning and engagement session. Please don't see this as a, we're speaking directly to you. And so please do shout out at any time. And what we're going to try briefly cover, and as Constance did mention, we always sometimes have lots more that we want to speak about than we have time for. So we will prioritize questions and interaction, because the content you will also get in the toolkit, which will be coming out later this month. So we're going to be focusing a little bit around understanding stakeholder engagement, a little bit briefly on engagement collaboration mechanisms, which I'm sure many of you are implementing and managing within your projects or looking at, and then a little bit around mapping stakeholder interests and addressing power, discussing a little bit around relationships, and then some aspects on landscape governance considerations. And as Constance said, we've also kind of analyzed and put together from what you mentioned in the survey and some of the insights about the areas you want help troubleshooting. So after the discussion, we can also go to some of the tools and matching some of those areas that you wanted help with troubleshooting. So just very, very briefly, in terms of the Shared Decision Hub, we were founded in 2012 at C4 Aircraft, and really came about as a unit because Constance, myself, and some other colleagues really felt that like the idea of relationships and a structured stakeholder engagement process was missing in many of the projects. So there was a lot of assumptions, there was a lot of work, plans put together and project design with this assumption that these different groups would connect and that different people would understand each other, and that between the components of a project, relationships would be formed. So we really founded Shared to try and debunk this in some sense and say that relationships and the time you invest in building relationships and engagement is as critical as anything you might do on a technical component of a project or a building an evidence tool, etc. And so we really focus on a process to bring in the evidence and the dialogue, and then looking at how do we help with this decision-making process and continually be adaptive in our approaches. So we've been lucky to be integrated into many of the C4 Aircraft projects, and also outside of the C4 Aircraft network in other areas with over sort of 20 countries to date. So we try to bring in some of that experience as we go through things. We also just wanted to say I didn't want to get deep into the shared principles, but we do have a set of principles that we try to make sure underpin all our work. I did just want to highlight about ecosystem services and processes, and that we, in some sense, both the backgrounds of some of the leading shared people do come from a natural science background. And we always maintain that in some of our deliberations and our engagement processes, building that connection between what is the underlying ecosystem services, what is the natural resource base of the work and the area you're in, is so critical to draw those connections to. So we always try to enhance and work with the stakeholders to understand that there's a big connection between the ecosystem service base and thinking about the resources you're working with and how that connects so deeply to the engagement and the people. So in terms of an engagement process, I think from the LFF network and the work Kim has really pioneered on some of the initial publications you have on integrated landscape management, I think it's already become clear how important structured stakeholder engagement is, and that it really is a process. But what we've tried to do then is match that as Shared, we have, I guess, a structured process and a couple of steps that we've put together as a kind of engagement approach. And really the idea is to say, when you have a sort of structured process, it may help you in your planning to look at different ways of sustaining and monitoring and learning and adapting from your approach. So we call this more of a structured approach. And just to reiterate, and also I know we've got Siobhan here from Mauritius, but we've had the chance to dive a little bit deeper into some of their processes. That this framework and suggested set of tools is not linear. So it's not like you need to go through all phases. It's not like you may need to use all tools and methods. And I think very importantly, what we stress is this does not have to be led by an external expert. We try to make sure we ground these tools and methods so that you and part of your team can decide who amongst you has maybe the skill sets that might be able to lead a short vision session, or who might be able to convene and do a stakeholder mapping. So we also want to stress a lot with the shared approaches that this is not external capacity you need to bring in and it becomes a burden. It's just skills that as project managers and implementers, you're able to execute. So it has three kind of key areas where, and again, just to say it's not linear, you may see the arrows taking you from one side to the other. But the idea is if you want to kind of have a systematic engagement plan, you may have to think about the context and analyzing the stakeholders, which we'll go into a little bit now. And then this idea of actually planning and implementing. So you've understood your stakeholder network, you've understood what the behavior changes you want to maybe shift. You've understood some of the institutional arrangements, power, some of the system you're working within. So the planning and implementation really sort of helps you think, how do we integrate this now into our work plans? Have we got work areas that actually address some of the things we're seeing from analyzing our stakeholders? Do we have a focus on some of the partnerships that we might need to be aware of? And I think importantly, because Constance and I have worked in many multi-project scenarios like you are in LFF, addressing, is there a KPI in our work plan around engagement? Is there something we're actually tracking to show that the importance of engagement? So there's also a process of saying, how do we monitor the success? So the effort we put into engagement is also something that we're rewarded with, and we know that it's moving the project forward. And then lastly, looking at sustaining, monitoring, learning, and adapting. And there's many processes. We won't have time to go into all of these, but really, for example, one of the things that we've done with many projects is these joint reflection and learning sessions. So instead of normal maybe end of project or end of year M&E, that really there's an opportunity to do joint reflection, learning, and integrating evidence, so that you might not know so much about biodiversity, or you might not know about the land health, or you might not know about the coffee plantation work, but having that evidence together and bringing your stakeholders can really help with these aha moments between them. I just wanted to quickly also ask everyone, in the survey, and from the responses we saw, we did see that, did you feel confident to design an engagement process? And we didn't have anyone positively say, yes, I feel really confident. And so we were just wondering if anyone who did respond to the survey may want to say why they say maybe. Is that because they don't know a process, or they feel like they haven't got the steps to do a process? Does anyone want to quickly shout out or kind of respond why they maybe don't feel confident at this stage in terms of an engagement process? I'll just see. And as Khalil said, this is a learning space. Anybody want to respond? No. No one yet. Okay. Well, if you do, just put your hand up. But okay. Junji says maybe there is no specific procedure in stakeholder engagement, so we're unsure. Okay, so something that's it's really useful to kind of know, not maybe a specific procedure or a process, so we're unsure. That's really useful. And I'll keep monitoring the chat box, but these reflections are really useful to know, especially from the central component, whether it's about an actual process that may help, or it's in the design, or it's in between the team composition. So these insights are really, really useful. I will quickly zip back to the slides. So, and please do shout out anything, stop me at any time. So a little bit now in terms of engagement. And I don't think anyone in this network needs to be told about how complex landscapes may be in terms of how landscapes are derived, how complex they can be, and how difficult it can be in terms of managing lots of different activities, lots of different layers within a landscape. You've got cultural layers, you've got political layers, and you've got different land users. So landscapes pretty much present one of the best example of why engagement processes are so critical, because you have this really complex dynamic. A group doesn't neatly fit into an administrative zone. You've got this complexity of lots of different stakeholders that are interacting. And even though your project may be very specific on a specific topic, and there might be a stakeholder group that's really critical to for you as a project to address, and B, to think, how do we bring them in some of our work, or how are we aware of their influence on our work? So I'm sure everyone is quite aware of the definition, but really when we think of a stakeholder, any kind of people, community, or group who are positively or negatively impacted by a project, initiative, organization, or can impact decisions. So these stakeholders are both internal, within, for example, your landscape, and also external. We also just wanted to explain, and I'm sure, again, this is very something you're really aware of, but often when you do a stakeholder mapping exercise, you'll zone in and you'll say, I'm working on this quite specific topic and strategy. So I know that I need these scientists and I need this group. But you've got to remember that your stakeholder network is also maybe far outside of the locality of your landscape. They may be in the national capital. They may be even global actors who are financing or influencing different investment into the landscape. So it's always good to think, how do I make this kind of mapping circle bigger as I go through and understand the stakeholders in my network? So these are your definitions in terms of how you defined stakeholder engagement in some of your processes. So some of it is bringing together rangeland stakeholders. This is maybe from one of the projects here working more specifically on rangelands. And so both NGOs, government, and community for one decision making. A lot of you talked about involving individuals or groups sharing interests at diverse levels. And it's really good to see a lot of you were also referring to different decision making levels. So the sense that decision making is done at very different levels. And then also looking at actions designed to influence, listen, and involve. So yeah, there's some, just to kind of honor that within this network, and that's part of this session, there's a lot of expertise here on how people are thinking about engagement and defining. So there's a lot to learn across the network here on how people are addressing these different issues. And so when we move from understanding what a stakeholder is, the next step is really saying, what is stakeholder engagement? It's the systematic identification. So it's a skill we do that we can identify, we can analyze, we can plan, and we can implement actions. So that we as a project, for example, have a good handle and say, we have a stakeholder engagement process. We know who our stakeholders are, we understand them, and we know how we're going to work and address those stakeholders. So we also wanted to just include that maybe in the framework, it might seem that there's a lot of formal steps, but we can't stress enough that so much of engagement is the informality. It's the relationship building. It's the seeing a power dynamic in a room and knowing that you've had a meeting and you need to step out of that meeting and you need to fix that power dynamic. So that's maybe the informal process. You also need to know that we're all people and people come with different stresses and energy, and how in our engagement work can we take time to also build those relationships. So stakeholder engagement can be different ways in terms of one way, communication and consultation. Two way, where we have this more deliberation, we're trying to empower stakeholders. Bottom up, where it's a very community-led and there's a very structured way in terms of community engagement. And top down in terms of agency or expert-led. So thinking about these processes. And it's really good maybe as a project to say, how many of these mechanisms are we using? Are we doing a kind of systematic approach? Do we have all four of these kind of engagement pathways covered how are we designing or thinking about our engagement. And again, I don't think you all as landscape managers and also probably very highly regarded natural resource management professionals, but really in terms of managing complex problems in environmental settings, really involving communities is so critical, and then ensuring that these communities take active roles. So how can we ensure that there's this active engagement of these communities within our landscape work? And then also understanding that a goal is about empowerment. So how can part of the engagement activities within your landscape work be empowering in terms of the co-learning, the building, and the strengthening capacities? And this, we just add that there because these are some of the things you might want to think about if we start to track this work. Can we actually track how much co-learning is happening? Can we track relationship building? How do we think about strengthening capacity? So this gets quite interesting when you start to think of how do you track these indicators. And Kim has been doing a lot of work on that, might want to add a bit later. And I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to spend too much on this. Constance, I'm also watching you. You can ping me. But really, when we think about facilitated process on engagement, we think about relationships, which we've said here. And we think about process as a really important part, and then content. So you may start, these three, I guess, pillars are really important for stakeholder engagement. About the fostering of the relationships, the process. So you have a really structured process, and then you really nest this around your theme. So you're very clear, your project might be addressing wetlands, it might be addressing biodiversity. So that's your core theme, but the process and the relationships and the mapping helps you widen who needs to be in your engagement network. So I've just defined this, so I won't go over those. We also wanted to stress a little bit about community. We saw in some of the survey responses, like some of the troubleshooting or the issues, and we have this with other projects, is to say, who is the community? Who are our communities? How do we define them? And then how do we do engagement that's authentic? But what if we're operating over a big area? Constance and I have worked quite closely with a lot of country stakeholders on the Great Green Wall. And as part of their national engagement, I mean, you have countries that have to try and address 2,000, 3,000 plus different communities. Like that is their network. So they face really difficult contexts of how do we actually authentically know that we can get to each of those levels of community, knowing that they're not the same. And actually within a 20-kilometer difference, you can have a completely different community in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of their power and their decision making. So how as a project can you both recognize community, but be aware of how different it can be. And I won't spend too much time in terms of community engagement, but this is something we can go into a bit later. But really understanding how engagement done at a community level can be very empowering to the social groups and networks versus top down. So although you might be thinking that we're doing community consultations, how do you bring in the co-design? How do you bring in those issues just as much as the evidence that might come from a tool or an app, etc.? How do you make sure that these insights are as critical in your decision-making process? And again, these are some of your reflections in terms of stakeholder engagement and why you feel it is really valuable. Firstly, about conflict reduction. There's many of you actually in the survey who did speak about this, about how there was an issue about conflict. We know in a lot of little landscape projects, some of the stakeholders and some of the targets you have is an understanding, for example, how private land ownership, private companies, how does that play out? Are they a stakeholder that you're thinking of? Do you feel comfortable to bring in private sector or private companies? And we have to deal with kind of land ownership. And then, yeah, just in terms of some of the other areas about in one of the projects commenting that they share difficulties in a forum in terms of technical committee meetings that it had on a yearly basis. So it's also good to see some of the frequency of some of these interactions. You'll see a yearly basis. You might reflect and say, is that enough? How often do we need to be speaking to our stakeholders? How do we not make this work too burdensome, but make sure that it's a critical underlying part of our different components? So I won't actually go into these. You'll get these in the toolkit, but there is also lots of very useful guidelines on what is the minimum kind of quality standards that come with community engagement. So you'll get more information on those in the toolkit, but it's also that there's many other themes, I guess, and sectors, especially the health sector, that have really pioneered some of this community engagement. And so are really good at this. So just to kind of circle around on some of the engagement for us. So we've seen why engagement is important, but how do we bring people together? We have multi-stakeholder platforms, multi-stakeholder partnerships, we have coalitions, and all of these in some sense are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to mobilize stakeholders to achieve a common purpose. And hopefully in our cross-learning section just now from some of your work, we'll hear how maybe you might be implementing multi-stakeholder forums or partnerships, and maybe some of the difficulties or the successes you're having. And one thing just to point out is often we feel like once we set up a coalition or we set up an MSP, we've succeeded because we've created a forum for dialogue. But often, sometimes that might be seen from a donor, like, great, you set up an MSP, the government will fund it, we now have a structure. But I think it's also really important to reflect on, has that formality now taken away the authenticity of maybe the stakeholders feeling that they can go and voice their concerns, where it might have been more of this kind of exchange when it was an informal kind of structure. So it's also really good to think about, creating these structures and what that means for the authenticity of the exchanges. And then really just to kind of point out, we need authentic engagement. It needs honesty, awareness, openness, and transparency. And that's from ourselves who are running the engagement, but also to kind of instill within the stakeholder network. Constance, I will stop so that I can hand back to you. And I will just check, is there any questions a little bit on the framing around engagement, etc.?
We're getting some really important points registered. In terms of, often we enter a project on a technical basis, and so the engagement piece may feel a little bit foreign. And then also, I really appreciate this one on how to maintain the level of engagement, and we're more invested engagement than the stakeholder is. We've all seen that. Thank you very much. Again, we feel safer in a technical setting, but gaining acceptability and consensus among stakeholders requires an investment in time. And this is something that projects are not often given. And I wonder if we want to just take a couple of minutes to talk through those. First of all, we are in a place where perhaps not all funding groups are available to say, we're going to give you the time to do this process. We're going to give you the time to identify the interests and what are the multiple objectives of the stakeholders you're going to be working with, so that you can hit the ground in a much more solid way. And we've worked on projects where that at the time wasn't afforded. We've worked on projects where we were basically the centerpiece of the theory of change, this approach, an engagement approach. So we have to work with what we're given, but we don't, and we also have to deliver on our projects, but we have to be clear about what is, and I thought those minimum standards are very, very helpful. What engagement is absolutely necessary to achieve, as Sabrina's pointed out, that common purpose. So I feel like there is a tension in terms of the investment. I mean, as long as we've been doing participatory work, people have called it a transaction cost. And it's more a transformation investment. Sabrina, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think these are such good practical reflections, which we see so often. What happens, we're in a project, as I work in this component, I have these KPIs for the year, I'm already constrained just trying to make these activities work. How how do I take on engagement work? How do we manage this? It seems like a lot. But that's why these kind of general principles of, do we know, even just in a 1 hour meeting, having a mapping between all of you who may be working on different components, and understanding, do we know who our stakeholders are? Are we seeing more stakeholders come in? And then it's also about being creative, which is we've had to do ourselves in running engagement work. So you might have to, as part of an event, or you might have to kind of work it in as part of another theme. But thinking about, could we actually build in some time there that there would be some, whether it's a small workshop or it's a set of collaboration meetings, you have to be quite kind of creative to say, can we still build these events in that allow us to spend the time to think about our engagement and build those relationships? So you might be doing an invasive species count, for example. You have a field activity that's very specific. You have technical specialists that will come in. But maybe as part of that, you can build in a consultation process at the beginning, or the training. So you might be training on invasive species collection, and the target is to clear a specific area in your landscape. But even events like that are more technical allow you to think about, can we build in some of the important engagement work to help us understand in this area of our landscape what's going on and what might be infringing, etc. So sometimes it also is about being creative to say, it might be a very technical event that you're running in your project, but does this allow us to also really make sure that we're focusing on the relationships? And so just a bit of reflection there. Constance, I'll hand back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And please keep registering your concerns, your questions.
Wanda, please go ahead. Your hand raised.
If I can also just chime in, I think
yes, perfect.
Not viewing engagement as a form of a separate event, but more like a day-to-day kind of activity thing, because throughout the project, we as the project partners and the various people we are working with have to interact. And so stakeholder engagement is made easy by building relationships, and relationships are majorly built on trust. So as we interact on our day-to-day, ensuring we are fostering relationships that are reliable and trustworthy, to the point that if someone is stuck somewhere, or if you bring some sort of information to someone, you're easily getting their buy-in because of the level of trust that they have in you, I think is also another way that we can view it, because there are very many aspects or ways to ensure engagement and ensure we are involving all the relevant stakeholders. So yeah, I thought I should just bring that up. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Wanda. We'll definitely actually be echoing you in some of the next slides. So thank you for that. Greatly appreciate it. All right. So I wanted to just quickly talk about vision setting. I hate that we can't get into the weeds on some of these, but the most important thing is coming back to this engagement framework, which seems quite elaborate, but it does tee you up to respond to and responds to some of the questions. But in our first scoping, and you've done these systems maps, but then you also have an opportunity to use those systems maps to bring different types of stakeholders together to talk about the different dimensions within that. And we're going to go into that a little bit later. But I want to bring us to the vision, because I feel like one of the things that Shared has found is that by getting people involved in a very robust vision, not something that is just a theory up on the wall, that you have the opportunity to start to build in some norms, as well as people finding their place in a landscape process because they're part of a desired outcome. So I just wanted to ask, first of all, have people in your projects, how have you been using vision setting? Have you set visions for the landscape with community groups, with different stakeholders? Sabrina, if you could watch the chat box, if there's any feedback here, if you've done a vision setting, and then I'll just go very quickly through that. if there's nothing coming, I'll look forward to your reactions then. So when we do vision setting, it's very much about a collaborative process for outlining a compelling vision that we can continue to test our decisions that we make in this project, in a program that we're working on, that we can make them towards. And so we use it. It's very much about ensuring that you've got a powerful strategy. It's a basis for designing your interventions, your services, your policies, and your partnerships. And so we identified three main steps in terms of building a more robust vision is about understanding people's aspirations. What must their lives be like? What must the landscape look like? And then to clarify, then what do I actually have to put in place? Not the how, but what do I have to put in place to support those outcomes, and what's going to be necessary to sustain those? So if you're doing a vision setting, obviously you have a theme, you have a timeline, but you also identify the dimensions. And these are typically the dimensions of sustainability we often talk about. And so we're breaking it down into agriculture, environment, economic, sociocultural, institution, political, governance, etc. So if we were to do an example, what we would have is we would have that set of stakeholders identifying what are the outcomes they need to see in these different dimensions. And so they're defining those outcomes. So for example, we absolutely have to have restorative and diverse agricultural production. We have to have clean and abundant water resources. We have to have value chains that are actually founded inside of regenerative activities, so our landscape is moving forward. And you want an appropriate governance system in place. Then you start to talk about, okay, once we've defined our aspirations, what must we have in place to support those? So you get people to actually talk about what would be the mechanisms, what would we have to create to ensure that those aspirations are going to be met. And so it could be that we need a mechanism for gathering and reflecting upon our indicators so that we know we're moving towards it. We need to have access to healthy food in the local markets, as well as what's coming in from outside. And then lastly, the step is what has to be in place to sustain it. And so we don't usually have this as a part of a vision, but in this case, it helps us to really talk about how do we have to behave in this system? What does the landscape have to be like? And how, and what are our reputations going to be, and how do our businesses need to be? So in fact, going ahead and identifying some of those really underpinning pieces that we're going to have to work on in order to make the whole thing work is really important. So in order to sustain, the landscape absolutely has to have these functioning ecosystem functions and cycles. The community members have to be willing to work together and support one another. We need to have a responsive and effective government. So this three-part goal is already a way to start weaving stakeholder objectives into a system approach and a common desired outcome. So this is why we wanted to just spend a couple of minutes on this particular approach. And then if it's in a community, you can take that kind of, layered language and you can make it into something that people can actually refer to in terms of a vision statement. And in many cases, we've seen communities put these visions on the wall because we need to be able to say in our planning and implementation processes, we are aiming at this. Is this going to help us achieve that? I'm going to spend, let's see, just a couple of minutes. But the bottom line is we use these different dimensions because what we talk about often is we have a landscape approach because people have multiple objectives. How do we get people on the same page? How do we help people start to foster the relationships that will be necessary to achieve it and to build that ownership and buy-in? Very quickly, I want to talk about mapping stakeholders. And this is, I want to kind of take it from the vantage point now that you've asked those questions is there is a tension, right? How many stakeholders are the right amount? How many are too many? Do we start with a small group and then expand? And so I would like to reinforce the idea that the stakeholder group may grow as you do more and get more engaged in the process. But what's important um, is to understand that yes, there are going to be these challenges. There's going to be a competition. There's going to be conflicting interests. But I love that some of you came with solutions. Look, get them involved early on, get them involved in decision making, and you will reduce the amount of conflicts among our different stakeholders. So we're just talking about stakeholder mapping. There are a number of steps, there are a number of approaches, but it's very important early on, and this can build on your situation map, is who are the stakeholders that need to come to the table. And so these are just some of the categories that you want to consider to make sure that you are being all inclusive. You want to be understanding of what those roles are in terms of what are they actually, first of all, their interest. What is their role in ensuring that we're going to have this landscape that is resilient? And then we want to know, how are these stakeholders related? What is it that they give? What is it they get from one another? And this is also a good place to start to build that energy and ownership, but also really recognizing, are we exchanging information, or are you giving me money? How is this actually, how are our relationships working? And then we constantly have to go back and say, have we been truly inclusive? Have we included the people that are both most influential and those who will be the most influenced or impacted by the decisions? So who are those people who are at risk of being underserved? Jesse is sort of the new terminology that we're using for ensuring that we are being inclusive and we're building towards equity and equality. So social inclusion is certainly a big piece of it, but you always have to ask, who else needs to be here? So you may start with a smaller group, but then you may say, oh my goodness, we've completely missed this group and we need to bring them in. And so when we're talking about this engagement, we're looking at both the multi-stakeholder collaboration, so all these different types of actors, and within those stakeholder groups, there is heterogeneity, but you also are looking at cross-sectoral coordination, which is one of the highlights of landscape approaches. So then you start to ensure that you are bringing colleagues from different sectors so they are seeing their role in these efforts. Um, so I would just finish this section by saying it's really important that we understand what people's needs are in relationship to the system, to the desired outcome. We understand their motivations. We understand their potential barriers, and we're very keen to find out what they would expect from us doing this differently, this different way, and continuing to stay on top of concerns, because it's the immediacy. Oftentimes we're building in long-term planning and people need things to happen now. And then who are the different stakeholders related to within that systemic and within that vision? We want to talk very, very briefly, we've got just a couple of minutes, but about stakeholder influence. And I think this is a really important place of understanding who are the stakeholders, what influences them, what is their scale of influence, who could actually influence them, and then what are the tools and processes that would be used. And so we do this by understanding where stakeholders fit in terms of their interest and in terms of their level of influence or their power. And so when you start to map which stakeholders, and you invite the stakeholders to do this, they can see themselves in terms of their level of interest, in terms of the level of power. And then through the approach, you start to understand, okay, so we're going to have people that need to be convinced. We're going to have some people who are actually going to end up being our change agents. We're going to have people that we're going to have to really work on in terms of gathering their interest and availability to be actionable inside of this. And then you are going to have people that are affected that you want to ensure that you're keeping informed. And I like the way this is set out based on level of influence and level of interest. You have your advocates, you have your people to inform, you have those people who you are going to readily consult with and collaborate with, and they're going to be innovators. And then you're going to have that group that is very much around the monitoring and ensuring that things are moving forward and continue to try and maintain or to build interest. And I think I will be stopping just to talk about power. This is a huge issue, and a lot of our our programs find themselves embedded in a hierarchy. And so we do have to understand what are the types of power that we're dealing with, whether they be a coercive, I'm being told I have to do this, whether they're legitimate, they're based on my position, or whether they're about a reward. So they're very important to recognize the types of power that are taking place inside of your stakeholder groups, and and building the types of skills that would be needed to negotiate the power dynamics. And here we've just outlined a few of the things that we've talked about. And one of the things I would just point out is that we always need to think about behaviors going forward. So I should stop there just to say, remember that you are a stakeholder. Once this thing gets started, the project managers, the project implementers that are paid by the project become stakeholders. So Sabrina, how are we on time? I think
yeah, I think that was great. I think we'll hand over to Kim shortly just to help us kind of facilitate the Q&A. We've had some really nice comments in the Q&A. And then also, Kim, if it's okay, you can introduce some of our project colleagues to make some sort of interventions and cross-learning. But yeah, there's been some really nice comments. And I think just Dom has also asked our Francophone and Spanish colleagues if anybody needs a quick summary, please let us know so that one of our colleagues could just jump in and give a sort of a quick insight. Is everybody okay from the language perspective? Does anybody want any update or kind of summary?
If I can just say, Gervais has suggested that a quick summary in French might be useful. So I'm wondering if Rafa or Divine would like to do that.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Bienvenue.
Voilà, merci. C'est Seydou Bey Ababakar. Je suis du projet Riposte.
Oui.
Je mets en plein écran. Voilà.
Oui, Raphaël.
Excusez-moi, I'm sorry. Je reviens.
Allô, Raphaël?
Allô? Allô, oui, ça passe bien?
Oui, je t'écoute.
Oui, je dis que je m'appelle Seydi Ababakar Bey, je suis du projet Riposte. Donc, nous, on voudrait partager une expérience de création d'une plateforme régionale, une plateforme régionale de gouvernance foncière et de gestion durable des ressources naturelles. Le cas que nous voulions présenter est le cas de la région de Louga. La région de Louga, bon, peut-être je vais partager mon écran pour un peu sortir le texte.
Je pense qu'on va revenir vers vous après. Je pense qu'on va revenir vers vous après pour parler des cas. Maintenant, on voulait seulement savoir si on peut avoir un petit condensé de ce qu'on a dit en français. Et Raphaël était prêt pour donner ce petit condensé. On va revenir après vers vous.
D'accord. Bon, peut-être je vais laisser à Raphaël hein, parce que je n'ai pas revenir en condensé ce qui a été dit. Je vais laisser à Raphaël. Merci.
So going back to the team, I think he wanted to give his case study, but I'm telling him that they will come back to him later. We just want Raphael to give a short summary of what has been said as of now. Raphael.
Great, thanks, Divine. So Kim, can I hand over to you just to maybe probe some of the questions, and then we can also respond. And I think we could start potentially with Lillian's, which is a big, very important one about what are the incentives. So maybe we could just see if there's any more questions and hand over to you, Kim, to also introduce the teams. Is that fine?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey.
Shall I plow on? All right. Okay. So great question from Lillian there. What incentives or benefits can be offered to stakeholders to encourage their participation and support? And I'm just going to reflect on that for a moment, because it really is a very central question. And I think that I have three responses, or a three-part response to this. The first of which is that a lot of people think that the way in which we should incentivize stakeholders into participating is by offering them inducements that are very often monetary in nature or financial, yes? So at one level, we often come across projects where they promise at the end of the day that if you get engaged, then you are going to receive a bigger income or a new income or a new income stream. I must say that for us personally or collectively in this program, what we've seen is that is a possibility, but it usually has to be accompanied by other aspects of it. And the other one, which I think is a very significant incentive, is power. And we have to remember that, especially when it comes to local communities, and also if our stakeholders, for example, are low down in government, or they're located in distant provincial centers or whatever it might be, very often they feel relatively powerless. And so as a consequence, thinking about ways in which we can empower people can be an additional incentive for them to get involved in whatever it is that we're doing. I also want to stress just here is that, and this was something that occurred to me during the discussion on power, is that we also have to bear in mind what it is that our target groups or our stakeholders think that will empower themselves. All right, so we can't make assumptions about empowerment. That really has to be organic. It has to come from the people that we're focused upon. And then I just wanted to touch on that final point. I think it was in Sabrina's discussion about looking at ourselves as stakeholders within a stakeholder community. We often find with our projects is that we have this tendency to diminish ourselves. So with a lot of the exercises that we've done with the projects, is that we go through this extensive, elaborate, and very often time-consuming net mapping exercise that identifies all of the stakeholders and the relationships between them. And at the end of it, we suddenly realize that the project's not even in there. And given that the project is kind of like the repository for the vision, this seems somewhat surprising. And I think it's very important that projects reflect on what we call, or what ethnographers actually call, positionality. Is that how you change a particular situation by coming into it and being self-aware of what you're bringing into that context. And we have to remember that, you know, we all come with attributes, but I think it's probably safe to say that for many of the people in this meeting, is that we will show up in a car that works. It might even be a brand new car. It might even be a shiny four-wheel drive. That in itself is a powerful statement. When we step out of the car, we move in and talk in ways that are different from the communities that we're approaching. When it comes to communities, rural communities, they might rapidly identify that we are urban, for example, or that we're educated. They will take note of men and women and the differences between them. They will take note of the clothing that we wear and that it isn't necessarily like theirs. And it goes on. There are many. The power game starts the moment we arrive in a community, but we shouldn't necessarily see that as being a bad thing. It can also be a force for good, and it can also be an incentive for communities to get engaged, especially if they perceive us as being willing to share their risks and willing to bring to bear some of our network assets. For example, that we have reach into government in the national capital, for example. Excuse me. I think Wanda gave me her cold. So those are just some thoughts there where it comes to power. But I wonder if there's other perspectives out there amongst you all on the power dimension. In our experience, people are generally very uncomfortable talking about power, even though it is such an important dimension of a landscape. Does anybody want to pose a question verbally or in the chat? It would be very welcome. I feel like I want to be an auctioneer and count down. Maybe everybody should have 3 seconds. Okay. The other aspect that I just wanted to emphasize really with power as well is that, you know, it's one of these dimensions that's very interesting, is that very often in projects we tend to set out or separate gender as a particular dimension that we have to focus on. But of course, gender very often is a power dimension, the power exchanged or not between the different sexes, the power that different sexes have to natural resources, the power that different sexes have to speak or be represented or whatever it might be. And so often that then builds upwards and outwards and manifests at different layers within a landscape, within a territory, within a jurisdiction. Marcella, can anybody help me with a translation on that one? I'm just going to turn my mic off while
Can someone translate Marcella's in? Oh, thank you, Dominique.
In the coordination bodies, it is always the environmental officers who are present. How can this be transcended to the decision makers? You know, that's such a fantastic question, because it's always been very perplexing to me that, for example, climate change as an issue ends up in the environmental ministry, whereas really it should be in all ministries. And I don't know if you heard about this recent initiative in Germany to create a kind of climate change meta ministry. It would be above all German ministries, and they all have to kind of feed into this meta ministry that's devoted to thinking about climate change, because it's a concern everywhere. And when we think about it in those regards, goodness me, sorry. When we think about it in those regards, it's being able to portray a landscape as beyond just environmental. And that then comes down to communicating effectively. As a technical person, I am well aware of my communication limitations. I tend to go off in rabbit holes a lot. I tend to use language that nobody else understands except myself. I tend to assume that everybody understands what I'm saying, including you, Marcella. I hope so. But that might not actually be happening at all. So there is a kind of blindness in how we talk to each other. I think that one of the more effective ways of encouraging other ministerial interests or coordination bodies to become involved is to be able to demonstrate the ways in which landscapes are profoundly human. And here, I often think that we have to remember that governments are really, they're there supposedly for the benefit of their people. So very often when they hear technical expressions of environmental problems and so on, that they then tend to they see that as a separate thing. It becomes abstract because it is so technical very often. Whereas economic interests or social interests or gender interests or whatever it might be, that's more sort of, in inverted commas, more real for them because that affects their voters. That's where protests can happen. That's where discontent can happen. And so we should capitalize on that. And so it's trying to express environmental problems in terms of their impact on human beings. One of the examples that I give actually comes from Cambodia. There's the largest lake in Southeast Asia is called the Tonle Sap. It means the Great Lake. It is a great lake. It's a huge lake. And it supports the world's largest inland fishery. And there are, Samnang will correct me, but let's say there's between 1.5 and 2 million people around the lake who rely on the fishery. And there's so much discussion about how the lake is being affected by hydropower development, about upstream trends, about reductions in sediments, and so on and so forth. That's one way we can characterize that lake. But we can also characterize it and think about it that if the fishery collapses, maybe 1.5 to 2 million people will suddenly get up and leave and move into Thailand. And that recasts the problem in a very, very profound way that then draws the attention of other interests within government and coordination agencies. So I think I'll just stop there for a moment. I'm conscious of the time and I'm going to do another cough, schedule a cough.
Thank you so much, Kim. Yeah, so I think that's a kind of perfect conduit. If we, I know 3 of our LFF project networks are able to kind of give some insights and reflections from some of the work. We've got some colleagues from Vietnam, from Cambodia, and for the Senegal project. I don't know who would like to go first, but Kim, I don't know who you want to call upon first, but thank you for those brilliant insights too.
So I know that Samnang is here. Tua from Vietnam, are you here? Tua from our Vietnamese project, UNDP. Okay. And Ndiaye from Senegal, were you going to talk? Or was Gervais going to talk? Okay, well, let's start with Samnang. Why don't you go? Nice to see you, Samnang.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Samnang from Cambodia. You can hear me, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for speak slowly. Okay, I'm going to say a little bit about my experience, but I want to hear from you as well. So it's just a small experience from my side. So I can say like about stakeholder engagement here. The project we plan to create a new protected area. It is huge area. It is about 30,000 hectares, something like that. And at the beginning, we try to educate the local people to aware about the importance of the natural resource there and how we can manage in the sustainable way for the natural resource that the people, local people are relying on. So yeah, and we also show them if the protected area is created, so they still can rely on the natural resource. So based on the experience, we see like the local people happy with the protected area establishment, and yeah, we try to do this dissemination in all regions that are located in the protected area, and then we go to the provincial level, try to engage with the all provincial department to understand about the protected area establishment, and with the process we see everyone happy. And after the provincial consultation meeting, we go to the national consultation meeting, and we invite all relevant ministry around the lake to understand why we need to create this protected area. And during the consultation meeting, so everyone talk together. So how we can do this? How we can okay, like some because like around the lake, not just only one ministry or environment who manage the area, but we have the Ministry of Natural Water Resource, Ministry of Agriculture, and Ministry, uh, like India, something like that, Ministry of National Defense, something like that. So that's why we try to engage everyone to see why we need to create this protected area. So we take like more than 2 years. Yeah, it's a little bit slow to establish this, but we try to make sure everyone understand why we created, and so finally when we officially established, so we see like everyone happy. Yeah, everyone, because why I read this point, because like some particularly in Cambodia, some create very, I mean, I can say like fast. Yeah. So less consultation meeting with some stakeholders. So when the particular is established, so there is a lot of conflict when we reach the area. And I still have time, right? Yeah. Okay, I want to say a little bit one more about the community and commune authority. Yeah. Actually, in Cambodia, we established community fishery and community protected area. So after 2000, so the government stopped the fishing load in Cambodia and tried to allocate the land with the fishery or with the forest resources to be managed by community for the sustainable way. And actually, because the local community, the lack of education, the lack of capacity to manage, so especially have no budget to implement their plan. Mostly they rely on the NGO to support them, or the government and national government to support them. So we want to be sustainable for the community management. So we try to engage with, we try to, like want the community have a more power to work closely with the commune level. And like in Cambodia, commune administration, they also have the budget from the national yearly. So they can use the budget to do whatever they want, to manage the resource as well, to develop in to develop their commune. And so far, mostly they like they focus on infrastructure. Yeah. So they care less about the natural resource. But like today, after we try to after the community fishery established, and we try to build their capacity how to engage with the commune authority to get the support like financial or material. So we can see like now we can see like local community and commune authority, they work closely, and some commune, they agree to allocate some budget to support the community, like to do the patrol or to restore the lake for the fishery, for the fishery resource inside their community area. So we can see it's a good sign like for the long-term community management after the project phase out. I think that's all from my side. I'm looking forward to hear from others as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samnang. That's fantastic. Senegal. Are
Oui.
you out there?
Oui.
Et moi, Monsieur Bey.
OK.
Oui. Donc, je suis avec ma collègue Youn Dijou, qui va peut-être me compléter ou bien reprendre une synthèse en anglais. Bon, ce que je voudrais présenter, c'est en fait une expérience de plateforme régionale dans la région de Louga. Donc, cette expérience, en fait, navigue entre la présentation de Madame Sandrine et de Madame Constance. Parce que dans un premier temps, nous avions des acteurs qui se regroupent pour prendre en main, montrer leur engagement dans les problématiques environnementales, socio-économiques auxquelles elles sont confrontées. Comme vous le savez, la région de Louga est une mosaïque de communautés, une mosaïque de paysages, une mosaïque de problématiques environnementales, économiques, sociales, où des agropasteurs ceinturés par des communautés d'agriculteurs ou bien des cités urbaines sont souvent en conflit avec les populations. Il y a également le fait que le trace de la Grande Muraille verte qui traverse, occupe une bonne partie la région de Louga. Donc, avec la région de Matam qui constitue la zone sylvo-pastorale. Ce sont des zones à grand enjeu. Et maintenant, il faudrait... Oui.
Divine, as it's coming in French, maybe what's useful is Raphael can do a short segment and then you can translate a little bit. I think maybe this will help, just so we can, is that okay, Divine? And then Yunji Jung has her hand back up. But Divine, is that okay to help here, just to do some translation?
Yunji, vous allez après faire une synthèse en anglais. Madame Yunji,
Yes,
vous confirmez?
Yes,
Voilà.
I'll come with a short summary in English.
Oui, je disais que nous sommes entre la proposition, l'exposé, la communication
Yes, can you hear me? Oh.
de Madame Sabrina et
Yes, I can hear you,
Yeah.
Sabrina. I can hear you.
Well, I wait. Yunji, you can explain in English. You can traduce in English.
No. Sabrina.
Yes, sure. Yeah, after the presentation of Bay, and I will translate in English. Does it work?
Yes. Bon, en 3 minutes, je peux synthétiser le processus parce que nous sommes une communauté appuyée par le projet Riposte et la FAO pour constituer une plateforme de dialogue multi-acteurs. Et maintenant, nous ne sommes pas encore arrivés au stade où nous sommes en train d'établir notre vision. Nous sommes au stade où on monte notre groupe, on monte l'Assemblée générale constitutive. Donc voilà où nous en sommes à Louga. Et ce processus rentre dans la vulgarisation des directives des volontaires sur la foresterie, les pêches, que porte la FAO et la Convention internationale des Nations Unies sur la désertification. Donc, on est en stade de promotion de la gouvernance foncière et à l'issue de ces processus sont engagés au Sénégal, à l'instar de 4 autres pays, pour qu'on puisse favoriser le dialogue et stabiliser ces zones à grand enjeu. Voilà ce que, en synthèse, le contenu de ma communication que je n'ai pas présenté et que je laisse à Madame Yunji de revenir en anglais. Je vous remercie. Merci.
Okay, so thank you so much. Me and Monsieur Bay, we are working for FAO Senegal Country Office project Liput, one of the project of Great Green Wall project. And I would like to summarize a little bit of what Bei said. So recently, we successfully launched a regional multi-stakeholder dialogue platform, which allows the stakeholders to engage in nature and land resource in Louga region, one of silvopastoral zone in Senegal. So the region of Louga in Senegal, there need to kind of multi-stakeholders conversation because of the climate change and there are multiple conflicts between elders, farmers, and private entities. So at first, the initiative committee was set up in 2021, including all stakeholders like NGOs, local authorities, private sector, and research institutions. And recently, the project reports signed to agreement with a national platform chaired by the Ministry of Agriculture and also coordinated by IPAR, which is the one of the think tank of Senegal. So with these committees, we structuring a field mission together, and we need to we find out what is the conflict and what is the base causes of conflict, and then we found out and we make a multilateral stakeholder conversation with these agriculture farmers and private sectors and elders together. But so it is successfully initiated, but one of our challenges is also like a kind of monitoring, because after this establishing the stakeholder conversation, then how we can like monitor this conversation is going on, because sometimes we felt like it is just one event that just the like stakeholders gather together and they made their conversations and express their challenges, and maybe they also proposed some solutions. But after that, it is kind of difficult to how to follow up and how to monitor this conversation and these proposed solutions. So this is a kind of a short, summary of our project. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Yunji and Gervais. That was fantastic, and some really great insights there from both of you. I'm afraid it looks like Tua from our UNDP project is not here. But perhaps Sabrina and Constance, I could very briefly just indicate part of the reason why we thought they would be interesting it would be interesting to hear them speak. And under the UNDP, they established platforms in the Vietnamese provinces where they're working. And what was particularly interesting from our perspective were some of the engagement challenges that they had. At one level, this had to do with the institutional context within which they were implementing. So one of the things that we have to remember with Vietnam is that it's a very decentralized structure. UNDP has to work together with the central government in Hanoi, but provincial governments have a tremendous amount of power. And so that power goes all the way down to commune levels, bearing in mind that their governance hierarchy is very socialist in orientation. So the local commune, they definitely want to know what's going on in there. They certainly want to know if there's private sector activities coming in. They certainly want to know what's going on with the local communities and so on and so forth. But the two provinces where these were established contrasted in one very significant detail. And this goes back to what Elijah from our Kenyan landscape pointed out in an earlier comment, which is around the time needed to develop these relationships. In one of the provinces, they were starting from scratch, whereas in the second province, they were capitalizing on previous work, and where they'd actually established relationships with the communities and the stakeholders beforehand. And so this is one of the sort of very interesting broader level conclusions, perhaps from the landscapes for our future, is really to while we might not be able to achieve a great deal in terms of engagement right at the beginning, if we continuously invest project after project by focusing on these communities, then that sort of critical mass of trust gets developed and can then become an extraordinarily important resource for a project to take advantage of. So I'll stop it there and hand back to you, Sabrina.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kim. That's really useful. And sorry we didn't have our colleagues online, but I think that's a very useful context. And hopefully we can also get some more information on that. I think Constance will pick up a bit of content, because what we wanted to now sort of reflect on was a little bit around some of the aspects that will come up around governance, and then some of the troubleshooting. But we do want to kind of reflect back to Yunji's and Raphael, the example, the question essentially, or the insight is, which is quite a not common, but it's a really hard part of engagement. So you might have a very specific, like a workshop or an engagement event. So you bring the stakeholders, you do a consultation, and then they would give you their like, this is our grievances or our ideas, and this is what we need. And then you as a project team might, for example, not have another activity planned in the next phase or the next 6 months of the project. And it's a way of saying, okay, well, we've gathered everybody. How do we now act on those requests, and how do we integrate those? And so I could just reflect on a few examples, and maybe others from other projects might want to also jump in where they may have had a specific process, and how they build that in. But I think the key thing is to try and organize them. So you've got insights that come out in terms of where we're seeing maybe power issues or issues that might, and what you need to analyze them with, would these affect, and I think going back to Kim, remembering that you yourselves are huge stakeholders in the matrix. So saying, with these issues that are coming up, do we see any that might actually impact some of our planned activities? So the consultation process has brought up that actually there are maybe some issues. So if they are, now you start to analyze them and say they might influence some of our activities, you then within your activity stream for that specific thing might say, we realize that we had planned a field intervention or something, but actually we also need to have a consultation process, because it's emerged that there's a power issue or there's a grievance we need to bring up. So there's one thing of saying, okay, what has come out of that? And then there's also this kind of adaptive nature where this is what engagement and relationship work at the heart of it is as a project implementer, you need to also be able to say, this is why adaptive management is needed in projects, because we're now seeing that this consultation has really brought up something quite different than we would have expected. And like Kim gave that example, you know, the implications of a big landscape change is it's transboundary. It's across different areas. So first of all, analyzing with your work plan and saying actually if some of those aspects come up, and then also this discussion across your project team about, does this bring up that we actually need to create a different component that we don't have in our annual work plan? And this is where I think the power of projects to also influence some of the funding cycles, some of the interactions with your funding and donors. This is where it's really powerful to really promote adaptive management and say, we're seeing that this could actually block some of our planned activities, and this is why it would be so important. So it's not a kind of comprehensive answer, but it's first of all analyzing those with the planned activities you do have, and then if you're seeing we do need to, the stakeholders have asked us for a follow-up process, then it's adaptively saying, how do we amend what we had planned? That's what they've asked us for, and it's got to be demand-driven. How do we work out with our activities how we can change this? And that's where a discussion with your project team, whether it's also some of the policymakers or the funding agents, this is where these conversations are so powerful to discuss, to say we can't ignore it. It's really important to then follow up, because that's the authenticity also. If you have a process, you ask for opinions and then they're not acted upon, this is where the relationship building is so critical. So I just wanted to say that was a great insight and kind of question. Is there anyone else from the project teams that may also want to respond, of like that you maybe have had a consultation event or a kind of a stakeholder process and then you weren't sure how to act on it? Is there anyone else who might want to give some?
Hi, Sabrina. I think
yeah, Divine, please.
Yeah, I think Gervais has been pushing to talk. Maybe he would like to share his experience. Gervais, est-ce que tu voulais parler un peu?
Merci, Divine.
Gervais, tu es là?
Oui, je vais participer.
Oui, alors, on t'écoute.
Merci. Merci, Divine. Bon, bonjour à tout le monde. Je voulais partager l'expérience du paysage BC-Chari, qui est un paysage transfrontalier entre le Tchad et la RCA et WCS. WCS intervient pour arriver à ce qu'on appelle la coopération inter-pays, donc binationale entre le Tchad et la RCA. Mais déjà, ce que je peux dire, c'est une zone à haute insécurité parce qu'il y a encore les séquelles de la crise qui a existé par le passé. Mais par rapport à nos efforts au sujet de la plateforme ou bien de la collaboration entre les parties prenantes, nous essayons d'animer un certain nombre d'actions. Nous sommes dans des environnements où il y a une diversité d'acteurs. J'entends acteurs par... on a là-dedans des transhumants, des bergers transhumants, on a des agriculteurs, on a des éleveurs, on a des pêcheurs, on a même des miniers, des artisans miniers et au-delà des braconniers qui sont là pour leurs intérêts. Et nous faisons face à une multitude de défis au rang desquels figurent déjà les feux de brousse. Les gens mettent les feux de brousse de manière désordonnée. Nous avons le braconnage, nous avons la transhumance avec tous les conflits que ça apporte. Vous savez, les conflits agriculteurs et éleveurs même vont jusqu'à... Il y a même des tueries et des morts d'hommes. Ça, c'est des choses qui ont souvent été enregistrées. Et WCS s'efforce d'une manière ou d'une autre pour apaiser ou atténuer tout cela, à animer les plateformes de dialogue entre tous ces acteurs qui interagissent là, parce que nos parcs aussi, les parcs que nous accompagnons sont beaucoup affectés. Déjà, il y a la transhumance. Parfois, lorsqu'elle est incontrôlée, les parcs sont touchés. Même les artisans miniers, parfois, touchent nos aires protégées. Donc, c'est vraiment beaucoup de défis et de challenges. Ça fait que dans la globalité, nous essayons d'encadrer les plateformes d'échange, de partage pour une meilleure coordination, une meilleure synergie et même une atténuation des conflits. Nous avons une considération sur ça avec toutes les autorités locales, même les forces de maintien de l'ordre sont associées. Donc, les plateformes sont composées d'une multitude aussi d'acteurs pour une meilleure compréhension, pour un dialogue participatif, de manière à ce que la gestion, le terroir qu'occupent les aires protégées soit mieux organisée au lieu que ce soit source plutôt de conflits ou bien de bagarres, quoi. Mais je peux déjà dire en grosso modo que c'est un grand défi parce que l'insécurité est volatile. La sécurité est volatile. Ça veut dire que l'insécurité persiste jusqu'à ce que le contraire. Et nous faisons avec. Bon, à ce jour, nous essayons d'animer du côté Tchad, du côté RCA pour qu'on arrive à ce qu'on appelle la collaboration transfrontalière. Peut-être ça sera une source de solution qui pourra arriver pour atténuer au maximum tout ce qu'il y a comme incompréhension par rapport à la gestion, par rapport à le trafic, la criminalité phonique qui se fait dans l'espace là. Donc voilà, c'est un peu ce que je voulais partager. Nous avons une plateforme qui existe du côté de la RCA, le CAPEF. Nous sommes en train de faire un peu le même exercice du côté du Tchad et nous verrons comment faire un réseautage, c'est-à-dire mettre les deux ensemble pour que nous ayons une même vision et que ce soit des cadres de dialogue, des cadres de partage, des cadres d'échange. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Would
for
you
those
want,
additional comments. Divine, do you want to give a very brief summary?
yeah, a
well?
very brief summary? Gervais was
see.
saying that they're working in a particular setting in Chad and Central Africa characterized by insecurity and where there is a lot of challenges in the landscape related to poaching, illegal mining, transhumance problems, summer grazier problems. And the specific characteristics of this landscape is that they are working in two platforms located in two different countries, where they try to bring in different category of stakeholders in order to identify solutions to the challenges that he mentioned. And they have been trying to work on the dialogue in the two different countries, but also struggling to see that they bring the two platforms that are existing in the two different countries together so that they can find a common solution in this landscape that cuts across two boundaries. So one in Chad and one in Central Africa. So they're trying to look at ways to bring in coordination between different stakeholders at different levels, being local authorities, national governments, but also intergovernmental parties to try to address the challenges. That's a brief overview of what he said. Thank you.
Very kind. Thank you so much. And these have been extraordinary presentations. And I know this is such a great opportunity also for you to hear from one another. And I hope that you have many of these kinds of opportunities to work across the different projects within the LFF. Sabrina, do you think we should take just a few minutes on troubleshooting and then open it back up for questions?
Yes, sure. And I see one of our colleagues,
Paul, might colleague from
joining.
Vietnam here.
He has joined. If he has, we can switch back, but I don't see him in the participants. So I would say let's go to troubleshooting, and then maybe if we do get our colleague, we can have that as one of the last exchanges. Yes, great.
Thanks so much. And please keep an eye so I
yes.
stop.
Okay.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Let me just get it into the right. I am not sharing my screen correctly. I can't seem to find the other one. Apologies. I'm not sure why it's not sharing the right version. Let's see if that works. Okay. So I do want to take a moment because to talk about facilitation for engagement and just help to think about how you build engagement into your project and the engagement moments. So one of the things that we want to think about is when we're talking about facilitation, it really is about how do we facilitate engagement towards the long-term goal of the project or program. And so for an example, C4 Aircraft has a Regreening Africa program And so it has a number of engagement that are planned over a 5-year period. And this is just a very short summary. But it's very much about what is the outcome we need and what are going to be those engagement touch points. And in this case, it was across multiple countries. So some of those touch points with our stakeholders are happening at the global level or at the continental level, and some happening at the country level. But they go from the inception, ensuring that we understand where we're going, what are our issues, how are we going to address them, all the way through to what is it that we're going to be reflecting on to make sure that we're continually adapting. So the point here is only that within each and every one of these, there are going to be facilitated exercises that are going to help us get there. So I've got engagement, facilitation, and tools in blue here. And these are just examples. But the idea is that you have these tools and processes that you're able to embed into your engagement touch points. So in the context of facilitating outcome-oriented processes where you have engagement, it's really about what the facilitator can do in terms of designing strategic engagements, in terms of ensuring that the diverse stakeholders are engaged and that they are part of the co-design, and that within the overall process, there are multiple roles of an active engagement specialist or a facilitator. And as we've mentioned, there's so many different ways that you have to ensure that you're continuing to build relationships and build interest. So these may even be a dinner meeting. They could be shuttle diplomacy, so that you're meeting with one stakeholder and then another before you build the connection. So multilateral and bilateral convenings, and then understanding, well, how am I going to help manage and transform conflict? How am I going to weave in partner relationships, among many others? So when you registered on the survey, you said, very important, all the different aspects of a good facilitator. I just would point out and say, yes, it's about the facilitator being self-aware and neutral. It's all about continuing to build these relationships. It's about understanding, reading, and responding to different actors. And it's about the process that is going to continue to promote participation and idea generation and networking. So again, towards the desired outcomes. But one thing about facilitation is it requires self-awareness. So it requires us to understand who we are and what are our passions. So you actually have to understand what drives you, but you also have to have a sense of how you are perceived. And it's not always that the facilitators or individuals have both of those skills. And so they're important to recognize. One of the other aspects going into this, while we talk about stakeholders are being heterogeneous, we also have to understand what actually drives people in their decision making, how they behave. And it's everything from their perspective and their worldview to how they actually look at information. Are they open to change? What are their power relationships? How do they feel inside a power, maybe inequitable situation? How comfortable are they with uncertainty? Because some of these things are really like moving. And then, understanding that individuals have their own fears and they also have their own overconfidence. And then one thing that really affects how people are thinking when you're working with them is, what is their mood? How have they had food? Have they had sleep? So we have to bear a lot of different behavioral activities when we are facilitating. And most often, people tend to rationalize versus being rational. And so we have to understand that when the emotions come into our decision making, that we tend to rationalize. So I wanted to just quickly check in on a couple of troubleshooting activities that are the engagements issues that you raised. So you talked about what you found difficulty in facilitating and about action-oriented outcomes, about how to set meetings. People are in different work regimes, and they're busy, and how to get with it when it's time to start problem solving and come to decisions. But you also talked about some more challenges around engagement and with among stakeholders. So how do we get decisions and how do we manage expectations? Different people have different ideas about how the land is managed. You talked about inefficiencies that too many stakeholders can complement or make it less efficient, and about how are we going to track progress. And I think that you've already referred to that one even in this conversation. Inconsistent interactions. This is really one of the that had to do with the last comment about from Sunshi. Solution finding, dealing with multiple objectives, and then you named a few others in terms of conflicts of interest, competition, and when we have diverse goals. And I really appreciated this one about incentives because I think we struggle with that and it's very context specific. And so what we have to do is work very hard to build ownership. So I only wanted to talk about a few tools that we use and why they can help address these challenges. So we talked about the stakeholder map. We talked about the landscape mapping process, which gets at, as has already been mentioned, the socio-ecological framing that you're working within, but it can certainly help surface where people are competing over resources, where they have competing interests in the outcome of the landscape and what that landscape should be giving them. What are the existing conflicts? And who are the influencers? What are the priority hotspots? And what are the solutions that have been tried before that were either successful or less successful? Then we talked about understanding stakeholder interests and influence. So each of these layers of your engagement planning or your project planning has an opportunity to start to alleviate some of these challenges. So we want to use the stakeholder interest and influence analysis to help us to start to have these deeper conversations and understand and ask, what is the impact that these conflicting interests are having on the landscape and on the sociocultural dimensions, and help to understand, so what is each stakeholder's impact in the landscape? Another tool we talked about was vision setting, but I'm only going to say it's a great opportunity to register different interests and help people see themselves in this long-term vision and start to sort of underpin seeing themselves with a sense of commitment to the outcomes. And one of the things that we've used in the past is actual commitment cards, so have people say, what am I bringing to the table as one of the stakeholders trying to reach this? Another tool we use is causal analysis. So a root cause analysis based on the barriers that you've brainstormed to say, we have this robust vision, what's keeping us from getting there? And then unpacking each of those and to ensure that they're not just a symptom, but they're actually an underlying cause. And when we do this work, and you do it in a very participatory way, you invite people to say, once I've identified these underpinning issues, are they a social issue, an economic issue, an agricultural issue, a political issue? And then you can also invite people to say, are there underlying perceptions, worldviews, or biases that are part of the barrier to achieving that? So it's a really interesting way and very compelling way to get people to talk about, first of all, what is really at the base of these issues that are going to keep us from getting there, but then who are the stakeholders that are going to have to be part of the solution building? And this is where Sabrina's and my experience has been that all of a sudden, the sectors see themselves, the stakeholders see themselves, that they're going to have to work together. And this is also a really important starting point for saying, okay, now what's the priority strategy? What are we going to do? The who, what, when, and how of our plan. And then the last couple that I would mention is that we use outcome mapping. And this is very much about understanding the behaviors that are going to have to be shifted in order to achieve the outcome of the project, the outcome that the group has identified. And this is a way to register those behavior shifts that are needed, identify those indicators, and then develop a plan for overcoming the behavioral challenges. And this has a lot to do with how we're going to be communicating, how often are we going to need to touch point, but it feeds into what the next one, which is this joint reflection and learning, where we actually have set out our indicators of how will we know, and we know what data we're collecting. We know that there are a number of experiences in the room, and bring people together. And it's better perhaps every 6 months, really, rather than a year. But just to have people look at all of the information together, the different indicators, look across the social, look across the ecological, bring together the practitioners, the farmers, the scientists, the decision makers, and actually interrogate what they're seeing and reflect upon that, and then use that as a way to adapt the program going forward. And so some of those adaptations are going to be, do we need to be together more often? Is someone missing? And do we need to actually change the operationalization of that? So I'm going to just stop there, but I just wanted to show that there are many tools that we can use to build that ownership, to build that incentive, and to overcome some of those challenges of competing interests. The more time people are spending together and problem solving together. So I think I should stop there. I know that we're going to run out of time, but I did want to just add in a little bit of information related to the challenges you raised. Thank you.
Great, Constance, thanks so much. Kim, I think Tor's in the room. I know we're almost at time of the session. Did you want to see if there was any quick insights before we wrap up the session? I know we've only got literally a couple minutes left, and I know it's late, it's very late for some people and very early still. So Kim, I'll just get your advice on that, and then if not, we can wrap up the session.
Hello, Tua, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, but my camera is not working, so I think that I cannot open the camera. Sorry for that. Can you hear me well?
Yes, please go ahead. Very
Yes.
quickly.
Okay, so in Vietnam, we also have the public-private partnership, and in our project, we also set it up for one of our province at the district level. In Vietnam, we have the national level, provincial level, and then district level. And the public-private sector, we set up it for 2 districts in the one province. And we did a lot of steps to engage public and the government, and also the private sector, to come to sit down together to have the common goals. But before that, we did a lot of steps, like we also share on the concept for the government and the private sector, and then we conduct the consultation meeting with the government, and also organize the study tour to the province that already have the private public sector already setting up successfully. After that, after the study tour, during the study tour, the government have a chance to visit the other district, and they also exchange how good of the public-private sector to help them to manage their jurisdictional reason, and also how to have to contribute to the social and economic plans in the district. So after that study tour, they had changed their mind, and they also document on the experience, and they agree with the concept. That's the first milestone that I think that is the most success to let the government agree to set up the private public partnership. And also we also do a lot of helping the private sector do the mapping at the region on the region to help them how to coordinate the best way to conduct the sustainable practice for the farmer at a field level, and also how to engage with the government to have the permission to work at the location. So we do the mapping on the list and the resource of the both side, and also on the potential that they can collaborate with each other. And we come up with the non-binding MOU signing to first establish that they agree to join together to for the public-private sector in Vietnam, that we call PPI Compact. And then after the ceremony, we also try to set up strategy and help them to build the strategy to work on move forward with the PPI Compact. So I would say that in our experience, we have to convince both sides. That's like based on building the trust and engagement for them to work together. And yes, that's the so that's the what I would say with you today.
That's great, Toa. Thank you so much, and thanks for jumping on.
That's super. Yeah, just to echo that, thank you so much. And the chance for the LFF teams to just exchange and hear such valuable kind of context reflections is really yeah. Thank you so much to all the teams for these reflections, and the learning across is really powerful. I know we're actually over time just by a couple minutes, and I know it's been quite a long session, and for many of you it's very late now. And for the early risers, I hope you've had a coffee and you're ready for the rest of the day. We just wanted to wrap up and just say a huge thank you for your participation. And we hope that this has given some insights and some ideas around some of the engagement work. And we really hope to kind of continue the cross-learning and ideas on how people are thinking about the stakeholders in their projects, how they're thinking about addressing some of the issues coming up. And we know this is a difficult work area because it's not so formalized, but it's so critical to the project outcomes and the way you do your work in the landscapes. So from myself and Constance from the training side, and we just wanted to say a big thank you for your engagement and those who, especially, I know you took a lot of time to answer the survey, and we've been badgering you to attend the session. So just very much thank you so much. And we'll, as mentioned, we're putting a lot more of this information into a toolkit. So it hopefully gives you some more step-by-step instructions and some insights, how some of the tools we've just mentioned today and some of the kind of more broader messages. We're going to run you through the engagement process, and you might be able to adapt those. And we'll try and make them as I said, as simple as possible. And so you can organize them as a 1-hour meeting or an activity. And we give you sort of guidance on how long it might take and what you need to get out of that activity, so that you can see this as a very practical toolkit, and that you yourselves are actually all engagement experts. You're doing this all the time and building on relationships, and now you can just put it into a more structured process. So Constance, Kim, Dom, is there anything else from anyone else just to close off?
Just to say thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insights and your queries. Thank you.
Yeah, same from us. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day or good evening. Bye-bye.
Super. Merci
Yeah,
beaucoup.
thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Merci. Thank you, everybody.
Merci à tous.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks, Divine.
Ciao,
Thank
Valentina.
You
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you, Divine.
Guys,
Nice to
bye-bye.
see you. Great. I think As soon as
Merci,
everyone's
Gervais.
done, I will stop the translate. I'll stop the recording.
Okay.